today we're doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a bit of street photography using a couple of different lenses, and I've come to my nearest city of Bath. Now, this is somewhere I've been all my life, and I've done a lot of street photography here years ago when I used to work in the centre of Bath. I used to use my lunch breaks, going out with a camera, got really into it. Something I stopped doing. I did really enjoy it at the time, just ran out of time to do it really. So I've come into Bath today. It's a lovely day, quite overcast. It's really, really busy because it's the summer holidays. There's loads of tourists everywhere. It should be perfect for doing a bit of street photography. What I'm going to photograph, I don't really know. Just going to walk around probably the whole city. I should have a step count on really because there's going to be a lot of walking. There's lots of places like the Abbey, then you've got the railway, you've got Crescent. You've got loads of different places that you can be very touristy about it. And I'm going to take my camera around with me. Now the camera I'm using is my A7C II, and on here is the Sony FE 1.8 35mm. Now this is obviously quite a modern lens, and it'll do everything I need it to for street photography, but I'm going to be flipping it up against a different lens which I've had tucked away in a box for a very, very long time, and not as long as I've been alive, actually. Well, longer than I've been alive, because this lens was actually made in 1962 is the earliest this lens was created, so this lens could potentially be 62 years old. It's a Nikon Nikkor SC Auto 1.4 50mm, so it's a 1.4 f-stop 50mm. I won't go into the ins and outs of f-stops, everything for those of you that don't understand it, but basically that's quite a lot of light it's letting in and should give me quite a nice shallow depth of field. How I'm using this on my Sony camera is the use of this adapter, which I've had for many years as well. This used to go on my Sony NEX7 when that used to be a camera that Sony did, and it's an adapter, an E-mount, which fits onto my camera to the Nikon Nikkor mount, so I can then use this old lens on my brand new camera. So it's basically old collaborating with new, and let's see what we can come up with if I can get this adapter back together. Good start. Anyway, I'm going to get this back together, and then we're going to go around with the camera, taking photos with the 35 and the 60-odd-year-old 50mm, see what sort of results we get, see what we prefer, and just have fun doing it. There we go. And for this one, I thought I'd run through the editing process that I'm doing on most of the images. I'm changing between black and white and colour depending on what the photo looks like. This one, because it has quite a nice pop of colour of the red on the bus stop, and also just the general look of the whole image, I think colour is going to work better than black and white. The ones I'm doing in black and white generally are the ones I want with a bit more contrast. But as you can see, the focus is pretty bang on the subject, and the background is blurred out nicely. So I'm just making general adjustments of boosting the clarity and dehaze, then going on to the light settings and just adjusting the highlights, the blacks, the shadows, a little bit more vibrance, just getting the colour balance that I want, the contrast I want, and as much detail as I can in both the highlights and the shadows without blowing anything out too much. I then go on to the mask tool, and it's really, really impressive how it selects the sky for you, just bringing back the detail so that it's not too blown out. I then just adjust the saturation ever so slightly, check what it would look like in black and white, but I definitely do prefer it to be in colour, so that's how I finish there. Open it up and save. Zooming in, you can see the sort of blur it gives on the background with this older lens. It's very, very soft. You get a bit of a fringe into it, a bit of chromatic aberration, which are things you could get out, but I think it gives this lens a bit of character. As you see, the focus on the subject is pretty bang on, and for an old lens like this, I don't think it's too bad. So that's that image done. Move on to the rest. Now here's another example of the editing I'm doing, and a really good example of the 50mm lens giving that lovely creamy bokeh that you can see there. This subject you'll see a few times throughout today. He's a busker that was in a few different places. And as you can see, the focus is on the subject here, watching this busker, and then the rest is blurred out. It just gives such a nice bokeh, I've got to say. I did test black and white, wasn't too keen on it, so I kept it in colour. First things first, what I do on all of the images is just to boost the clarity, get a bit more detail, dehaze, and that's pretty much it for the effects down there. I move back up to the light levels, check the exposure. I did raise this one up ever so slightly before dropping back the highlights, and then just checking again on the exposure. Boost a bit of the shadows, and then drop down the black so I still get a nice punchy contrast. Then a little check of the saturation, because I do find that this lens isn't quite as punchy as the 35mm. For going back to the effects and having a little tweak around there, giving it a bit of a vignette. But as you can see, just making those changes, it really makes that bokeh or the blurry effect at the background punch a bit more. I just love the look that this lens gives. As you can see, it's a bit hazy. I keep on referring to it as a dreamy look. It's just completely different to how the modern lenses seem to look, or at least the lenses that I've got. And that is the image finished. Now we're back on the 35mm lens here, and as I took this shot, I knew I was going to be editing it in black and white. It just lended itself to being a black and white image with the harsh lines. The way I framed it up, I knew I'd be able to get really dark, punchy blacks and some nice bright whites as well. So the usual adjustments with the clarity, dehaze, the exposure, and all things like that. Then I moved on to the black and white mixer. Now this lets you adjust different shades and tones within the different colours of black and white. And as you can see, I managed to bring up more detail on the skin tones, the shirts and things like that. And lastly, I just wanted to bring some detail back into the sky by dropping the exposure just on that part. I could have gone all the way back to black, but just having it like this, I think it gave the perfect balance of detail and moodiness. And moving on to this image, I kept this one in colour because there's so much vibrancy and colour going on. I think if I went to black and white, I'd have lost too much information. So the same processes as before, with the exposure, the highlights, the shadows, the blacks, the whites, and things like that. And then I selected the subject just to make her pop a little bit more. So quite a nice, colourful image, and I just brought a bit of detail back into the sky, as you can see, to finish it off. And I don't like the sky to be too blown out. A little adjustment on the subject as well, just to make sure that she stood out. Now, if I zoom in, you'll see what I mean about the difference between the 35mm and the 50mm. Of course, there's loads of different depth of field things going on here, but the background blur isn't quite as creamy and soft as the 50mm. And lastly, moving on to this one, still with a 35mm lens, I edited this one in black and white for the same reasons as the previous one. It lended itself to being a really nice punchy black and white image, so adjusting the exposures, highlights, shadows and things like that, and then again the black and white colour mixture, just seeing which items I could drop and raise to make it really nice and punchy. Lastly, I selected the subject just to make him pop a little bit more, and there we are, all done, a punchy black and white image. Well, I've been going around for a good couple of hours now doing a bit of street photography, and I remember when I used to do it, I got quite confident in doing it, and whether they were street performers or people that look like they're quite a character, I'd be quite ballsy in taking their portraits quite close as well, and no one ever seemed to mind, but I feel a bit more reserved this time going around with a camera. Despite it being really busy and cameras everywhere, I just feel like sticking a camera in someone's face just because it looks cool isn't really me. So maybe I was a bit ballsier when I was in my early 20s or something, but still really enjoying it. And what I am finding is that I'm naturally gravitating towards the newer 35mm lens. I think it's just because it's a comfortable thing to do. It kind of saves you quite a lot of time. I'm using it in manual focus most of the time, so I'm doing it all myself and manual exposure and things, but it's a crisper lens. Your focus is more on point, whereas with the 60-odd-year-old lens, which is understandable, is very soft, especially at f1.4. It gives you some lovely creamy bokeh, which I think this would be really, really nice in low light conditions or at night, getting some distant light that will go into that nice bokeh balls. So I may try this again at night another time, but for today it's still been quite good fun. I am finding, like I said, trying to focus with a lens that is as soft as this, am I getting it in focus perfectly? So I may be just being a bit too meticulous, and the photos of this are very crisp. This kind of has a bit of a, I don't know, a bit more of a character to it maybe, and maybe it's just the fact that it's an old lens that's made me think it's cool to use and the photos aren't actually that good. But it's quite interesting using an older lens fully manual, making you be a bit more conscious of exactly what you're doing with the camera. So I'm going to stick this one back on, try and restrict the amount I use the 35mm, and just make myself use this lens because it is cool and it's giving it a new lease of life on a very new camera. So stick this one back on, and I've now come up to the Crescent in Bath. So it's a very familiar face for many people, quite a famous landmark for Bath, and I'm going to work my way back down into town. So let's put this lens back on and carry on. Joe.
Mike.
Nice to meet you too. Before I go, I'm from Radford. I'm doing just general street photography again, anything that looks interesting. As you're quite well dressed, a bit of a character, do you mind if I take you for a portrait? Yeah? I know you don't like the scaffold, but it's how it is at the moment. Do you mind standing right in the middle of it?
Yeah, man.
Appreciate it. Sweet, thank you very much.
That's alright. It's been a real pleasure, mate. Take it steady.
You too. Now this image actually ended up being one of my favourites of the day, and a simple case of asking him, do you mind if I take your portrait? We had been chatting for about 5 or 10 minutes beforehand, so it wasn't completely random, and I knew the kind of idea I wanted to get with this image. He was quite a character, colourful clothing, and his look was quite strong, so I wanted to reflect that in the image itself as well, so making it quite contrasty, boost some of those colours, and make it a bit gritty and grimy. So I upped the clarity, upped the dehaze, and also upped some of the texture, which gave a bit more detail in the beard, the hair, and just all-round general look of the image. And as you can see, zooming in, I'm just checking on the highlights and some of the details I've got. Quite an interesting character, interesting look, and I'll hopefully reflect that in this image. As you can see to the left, the creamy bokeh that I keep talking about with this lens is almost like artifacts, like a computer glitch. Really, really nice when you zoom in, and when you zoom out, obviously it looks like that. This is where I was testing with the vibrancy and saturation, and this is where I saw actually this image would look really nice as black and white as well. Here is the colour version, but then I went back into Adobe Raw, started from scratch, and thought I'd do the edit in black and white as well. So once again, boost the clarity all the way up, and then a dehaze and a bit of the texture as well. And then I went onto the black and white mixer and adjusted some of the colours here to make it as punchy as I possibly could. As you can see, some work better than others, so it's a case of trial and error. I'm not that clued up on doing it without knowing what I'm doing, so I just adjust it, see what looks good, and leave it at that. So I'm adjusting all of these things, and then I go back to the general settings at the very top, under the light settings, which are the shadows, the highlights, blacks and whites and things like that. Got it to the stage that I really was happy with, and I thought that's a really nice punchy black and white image. Zoomed in on him and checked that the highlights were just a little bit too much on his cheeks. Drop that back down, up the texture a bit more, and giving it that gritty image that I really wanted. And there's the black and white version. Let me know which one you prefer. Now this is where my action camera decided to die, so my trip came to an end here, but I thoroughly enjoyed my day walking around my local city of Bath and just enjoying taking photos for a change. As you can see, here's some of the results of the 50mm lens, and highlights that creamy background blur and the bokeh that you're able to get with this lens. It has a certain charm to it. And here's some of the results from the 35mm lens. Much more crisp, much more detail, and it gives a different kind of look. So let me know what you thought, the 50mm or the 35. What was your favourite?